Have you ever wondered why some relationships start so well and then simply fall apart little by little? Why couples who loved each other deeply end up becoming strangers? The answer isn't in a big mistake or devastating betrayal. It's in something much more subtle and dangerous. A toxic cycle that operates in the shadows, destroying intimate connections almost imperceptibly. And when you finally realize it, it may be too late to save what's left. No relationship is born toxic. They transform. And this transformation process follows a specific pattern that Mel Robbins identifies as one of the greatest destroyers of human bonds. The scariest thing about this cycle is that it seems completely normal while systematically corroding the mutual respect, trust, and emotional security that form the basis of any healthy relationship. If you've ever had the feeling that your relationship is deteriorating even when there aren't constant arguments, if you've ever felt that something is wrong but can't pinpoint exactly what, then you need to understand how this cycle works. Because recognizing the pattern is the crucial first step in interrupting it before it becomes impossible to reverse the damage. The big problem with toxic cycles is that they are masters of camouflage. They don't appear as devastating storms that leave obvious debris in their wake. Instead, they operate as a constant, silent erosion, wearing down the foundation of the relationship grain by grain, day after day, until one day you wake up and realize there's nothing solid left to stand on. Mel Robbins explains that these cycles are so difficult to detect because they constantly alternate between pain and relief, creating an addictive emotional roller coaster. Moments of intense tension are followed by equally intense reconciliations. Painful criticisms are accompanied by seemingly sincere apologies. Periods of estrangement transform into passionate promises of change. It's like a psychological game where you never know which card will be played next. The human brain has a natural tendency to cling to hope, not reality. When we experience this pattern of pain followed by relief, our nervous system interprets the relief as a reward. That's exactly how addictions work. It's not constant pleasure that's addictive, but the unpredictable alternation between discomfort and satisfaction. This dynamic keeps intelligent and conscious people trapped in relationships that they know, at some deep level, are no longer healthy. Here's something I want you to do right now. If any part of this description resonates with your current or past experience, write just these 3 words in the comments. I choose clarity. These words have power because they break the emotional automatism that keeps toxic cycles running. They represent a conscious decision to see the situation as it really is, not as we expect it to be. The toxic cycle unfolds in distinct stages, and understanding each one is fundamental to identifying where you might be right now. The first stage is perhaps the most dangerous because it seems completely harmless. It's what Mel Robbins calls the accumulation of unspoken frustration. It all starts small, very small. It's the awkward silences you ignore, the annoyances you choose not to mention because you don't want to cause problems, the excessive concessions you repeatedly make under the pretext of keeping the peace in the relationship. It seems noble, it seems mature, it seems like what a loving person should do. But there is a crucial difference between healthy flexibility and toxic self-effacement. When you consistently swallow your discomfort, when you systematically avoid difficult conversations, when you adapt so much to the other person that you lose your own identity in the process, you are planting the seeds of resentment that will grow exponentially over time. Mel Robbins is crystal clear about this. What is not clearly communicated inevitably transforms into resentment. And resentment is like a slow-acting poison. It never disappears on its own. It only accumulates until it reaches toxic levels that poison the entire relational dynamic. The person at this stage usually prides themselves on being understanding and patient. They genuinely believe they are being the mature party in the relationship. But in reality, they are creating the perfect conditions for small, manageable problems to escalate into explosive and potentially irreversible issues. When the accumulated frustration reaches a critical point, we enter the second stage of the cycle, the emotional reaction followed by intense guilt. This is the phase where the person who has been swallowing everything finally explodes. And the explosion is rarely proportional to the immediate trigger. The frustration that surfaces is laden with all the pent-up emotion from previous incidents. The tone of voice becomes heavy, the words come out sharper than intended, and what should be a constructive conversation quickly turns into an emotional outburst. The person isn't just reacting to what happened today, they're reacting to weeks, months, perhaps years of unresolved issues. After the emotional storm passes, devastating guilt sets in. The person feels terrible for having lost control, for having spoken aggressively, for having hurt someone they love. Apologies flow naturally, along with sincere promises that it will never happen again. There is a genuine desire to repair the damage and return to the previous harmony. But here's the problem. This emotional back and forth creates a dynamic of confusion and dependence that is extremely difficult to break. The real problem? The fundamental issue that caused all the accumulated frustration is never truly resolved. It is only temporarily muffled by emotional reconciliation, waiting for the next opportunity to resurface with even greater force. This alternation between explosion and reconciliation becomes an addictive pattern for both parties. The one who explodes feels momentarily validated for having expressed their feelings, but then guilty about the method. The one who receives the explosion initially feels attacked, but then relieved by the reconciliation. Neither realizes that they are dancing a toxic dance that keeps them trapped in a cycle that only worsens over time. The third stage is where the most insidious danger of all lies: the normalization of burnout. Here, the cycle ceases to be an occasional event and becomes the standard routine of the relationship. People begin to accept that frequent and intense arguments are simply a normal part of being together. Phrases like, "all couples fight," or "relationships aren't easy," become mantras that justify clearly dysfunctional patterns. Mutual respect gradually diminishes, personal boundaries become increasingly blurred, and the energy that was once invested in joint growth is now entirely consumed in conflict management. Mel Robbins is absolutely direct on this point. When constant emotional burnout becomes accepted as normal, the relationship is already fundamentally unhealthy. The fact that this deterioration is gradual makes everything more dangerous, because many people only realize the seriousness of the situation when it is too late to save it. At this stage, people often develop defense mechanisms that prevent them from seeing reality clearly. They begin to rationalize behaviors that they would previously have considered unacceptable. They begin to lower their standards and expectations, convincing themselves that they are being realistic when in fact they are being self-defeating. The normalization of burnout is especially dangerous because it creates a new baseline for what is considered acceptable. When you get used to living in a constant state of emotional tension, when intense arguments become your version of normal communication, you lose the ability to recognize how a truly healthy relationship should work. But there is hope, and it begins with consciously interrupting this destructive cycle. Breaking a toxic pattern doesn't require aggressive confrontations or dramatic ultimatums. In fact, the most effective approach is much more subtle and requires something many people resist: consistent awareness combined with deliberate action. The first fundamental change happens when you stop swallowing your discomforts. This doesn't mean you should react dramatically to every little annoyance, but it does mean you need to develop the courage to address important issues before they turn into toxic resentments. It's about finding the balance between being flexible and maintaining your personal integrity. Communicating boundaries clearly is the second essential skill. This means being specific about what you can and cannot accept, and more importantly, consistently following through on those boundaries with your actions. Many people set boundaries verbally, but then ignore them when tested, sending the message that their words have no real weight. The third crucial change is learning to observe consistent attitudes instead of focusing on emotional promises. When someone promises change after a toxic episode, it's natural to want to believe that this time it will be different. But promises made under emotional pressure rarely translate into sustainable behavioral changes. If you're recognizing these patterns in your own experience, I want you to do something important right now. Write in the comments, "I don't normalize burnout." These 5 words represent a powerful decision not to accept toxicity as a normal part of any relationship. This decision, when consistently maintained, has the power to completely change the trajectory of your intimate connections. The most important aspect of interrupting toxic cycles is understanding that you can only control your own actions and reactions. You can't force another person to grow, to be more aware, or to develop emotional maturity. But you can decide to stop participating in dynamics that drain your energy and erode your inner peace. This might mean having difficult conversations you've been avoiding. It might mean setting and maintaining boundaries that will initially cause resistance. It might mean accepting that some people are unwilling or unable to participate in a truly healthy relationship, and that continuing to try to force that possibility will only prolong your suffering. The reality is that not all relationships can be saved, even when there is genuine love between the people involved. Love without emotional maturity, love without healthy communication, love without mutual respect is simply not enough to sustain a lasting and fulfilling connection. Mel Robbins teaches something fundamental. Healthy relationships require emotional maturity from both parties. When this maturity exists only on one side, you don't have a balanced relationship. You have one person trying to carry the emotional weight of two, and that's a guaranteed recipe for exhaustion and resentment. Emotional maturity includes the ability to communicate needs clearly without manipulation, the ability to listen to feedback without becoming defensive, the courage to take responsibility for your own emotional patterns, and the wisdom to actively work on your personal growth instead of waiting for the other person to change to solve problems. Where this bilateral maturity doesn't exist, where one or both parties are unwilling to do the inner work necessary to break toxic patterns, the cycle inevitably repeats itself. There may be periods of temporary calm, sincere promises of change, even superficial short-term improvements. But without genuine transformation at the deepest levels, toxicity always returns, often even more intensely. Recognizing this isn't pessimism, it's liberating realism. When you stop wasting energy trying to fix what's beyond your control, you regain the power to focus on what truly is: your own choices, your own reactions, your own decisions about what you're willing to accept in your life. The toxic cycle doesn't destroy relationships all at once, like an earthquake leaving obvious ruins. It operates more like a constant erosion, slowly wearing down the foundation until there's not enough emotional energy left to rebuild what's been lost. It's a gradual process that can take months or even years to cause irreversible damage. But when you finally see the pattern with complete clarity, when you understand how the dynamic works and what role you've played in keeping it active, something fundamental changes within you. You cease to be an unconscious victim of circumstances that seemed beyond your control and become a conscious participant who can make different choices. This awareness brings with it the power to stop repeating self-destructive behaviors. You stop justifying disrespectful treatment under the guise of love or loyalty. You stop expecting real change to happen without consistent and intentional effort from the other person. More importantly, you develop the ability to distinguish between someone who is genuinely committed to growth and change versus someone who only offers empty promises when they feel pressured. This distinction is crucial because it determines whether it's worth investing more emotional energy in the relationship or if it's time to protect your well-being by setting firmer boundaries. Mel Robbins is clear about an uncomfortable truth. Awareness of toxic patterns doesn't automatically save all relationships. Some connections have already suffered irreparable damage. Some people simply aren't in an emotional place where they can participate in healthy dynamics, regardless of how much patience or love you offer. But here's what awareness always saves. It saves you. It protects your energy, preserves your self-esteem, and maintains your ability to form genuinely healthy connections in the future. When you understand how toxic cycles work, you develop a kind of emotional immune system that protects you from engaging in destructive dynamics again. You begin to recognize warning signs early instead of waiting for problematic patterns to fully establish themselves. You develop the courage to have difficult conversations at the appropriate time instead of letting important issues accumulate until they become explosive. You learn to value your own inner peace enough not to sacrifice it in the name of avoiding temporary conflict. The journey to break toxic cycles isn't easy, especially when you have a deep emotional history with the other person. It takes courage to face uncomfortable truths about the dynamics you've been helping to create. It takes discipline to maintain new behavioral patterns, even when external or internal pressure tries to pull you back into old habits. But the result of this journey is worth every difficult moment. The freedom to live relationships based on mutual respect, honest communication, and joint growth. The peace of knowing that you are not constantly navigating emotional minefields or managing crises that could be avoided with basic maturity. If you've made it this far in this video, it's because some part of this message resonates with your experience. That's already a powerful sign that you're ready to make necessary changes. The first step is always recognition, and you've already taken that step by seeking to understand these patterns. Remember, you deserve relationships that nourish your soul instead of draining it. You deserve connections that contribute to your growth instead of keeping you trapped in cycles of drama and exhaustion. And you have the power, at this very moment, to begin creating these conditions in your life through the choices you make about what you are willing to accept and what you are not. Awareness of toxic cycles is a gift you give not only to yourself, but to all the people who will be fortunate enough to connect with a healthier and more conscious version of who you are becoming.